Issac Parades. We got to talk about him. Is he a trade candidate? Is he somebody the Cubs are going to keep? What did I think of his 2024 performance for the Chicago Cubs? Let's talk about it next. What's up, Chicago fans, Chicago Cubs fans? Welcome into the CCC Chicago Cubs Central channel, YouTube channel. I'm excited. I am your host, Mike Jones. Excited to be here with you to talk some baseball with you. This is your daily episode. Once again, thank you all for choosing to watch this video, watch this channel. If you like what you hear, if you like what you see, if you want more content from us, do me a favor and go ahead and like this channel. Again, if you like the trade for Issac Paredes and you think he's set up for a big 2025, subscribe to this channel. And then once again, if you think the Chicago Cubs are in for a big 2025 season, go ahead and share this channel with a friend. And we cover everything here on Chicago Cubs Central that's going on in the news for the Chicago Cubs. I'm your host again, Mike Jones, and let's get down to it. Issac Paredes was traded to the Chicago Cubs this year in the middle of the season for the biggest piece of the trade was obviously Christopher Morel is who they traded him for. And this story comes from the Athletic. The Chicago Cubs predicted to regret major trade deadline move. The Chicago Cubs have been predicted to end up regretting their trade to acquire one Issac Paredes. The Chicago Cubs made a massive move at the MLB trade deadline. The move was acquiring all-star third baseman Issac Paredes from the Tampa Bay Rays. So Paredes was expected to be moved, but the Cubs were not one of the top teams being rumored as a potential landing spot for him. But then out of nowhere, Jed Hoyer made the deal. Hoyer opted to buy talent ahead of the deadline, but he did it with the future in mind. Paredes has 3 years left on his deal following the 2024 season. He will be a big part of the Chicago Cubs' plans for the future, maybe. While the move is viewed as a key addition for this present and future, one writer has predicted that the Cubs will end up regretting the move. Now, why would you regret this move? Well, that's a good question. Mainly, he suggested that Paredes will struggle to hit the same power numbers in Chicago that he did in Tampa Bay. He finished off by stating that the Cubs should have pursued a player that fits better hitting at Wrigley. He had this to say: while it's hard to knock Hoyer for acquiring a 25-year-old with club control who is as good as Paredes, it's easy to question his fit in Chicago. There's a good chance that as time passes by, the Chicago Cubs might have been better off in hindsight going after someone who fits better at their home ballpark. Before his trade to Chicago, Paredes hit 16, count that, 16 home runs along with 55 RBIs while batting .245, 3.37, 357, and then .435 in his first 4 games with the Cubs. After that trade, he just recorded just 2 hits in 16 at bats, with both hits being doubles. Let's talk about Issac Paredes, guys. Issac struggled this past season for the Cubs. He was killing when he was in Tampa Bay, but Tampa Bay plays in a dome. They play in a covered arena. He then had to move to Chicago and play half his games outside in the air, and it was just funky. It was a funky weather season for the Chicago Cubs in general. If you look at, like I said, a lot of guys' stats, like I think the weather did have a lot to do with guys just not being able to produce the way that you would expect them to produce. Um, Paredes himself admittedly did not have his best season and his best time once he got on this Chicago Cubs squad. He struggled mightily with his swing. He battled, but he just hit into a lot of bad luck. I would say this past year. Part of me, I didn't even really want to do an Isaac Paredes episode just because I was looking at it and I'm like, man, like, can you really grade him off of this last past season, considering he didn't play? I mean, he played a bunch of games, not a bunch of games. He played a decent amount of games for the Cubs, but it was like a half season, and maybe he needs time to adjust to hitting at Wrigley. Maybe he needs time to figure things out with his swing. And like I said, he's a pull hitter. So again, when you see somebody like Isaac Paredes at Wrigley, all his home runs, literally, I saw a diagram where all his home runs were literally on the left side of the field. Like I said, so he's just one of those guys that's going to hit there. If that wind is blowing in, that's really going to affect his power and his ability to be able to hit. And we also know the alleyways at Wrigley are some of the longest dimensions. It's a funky dimension once you get to the alleyways at Wrigley. It's shorter to get it into the basket straight on, straight through center field. But once you start looking at those alleyways, you're looking at a harder time, a further distance to send that ball traveling through. So again, you got Isaac Paredes because you hope that his home run power could produce for the Chicago Cubs. He also was a very serviceable third baseman defensively. He did not make the same mental mistakes or little bitty errors like a Christopher Morel or like a gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. Who was the other guy that we just non-tendered the deal to? But anyways, I'm just thankful that the Cubs did go out and try to answer the question at third base. And I mean, yes, you lost the power of Christopher Morel, but Christopher Morel also struggled with his swing and miss as well. And then he also became a liability on defense. So if you're hitting under 200 and you're a liability on defense, you know, after a while, you got to figure something out. You got to figure something out. And then, like I said, Christopher Morel's numbers once he was not no longer a Chicago Cub, once he was a part of the Tampa Bay Rays, were not great either. And he's hitting in a dome park now. So, like I said, I don't know. I do think that Isaac Paredes, this trade was a good trade. I think that it was supposed to. I think Jed Hoyer had good intentions when he made the trade. He was really looking to try to answer some questions that the Chicago Cubs needed answered, that they just weren't getting from Nick Madrigal and they just weren't getting from Christopher Morel. Christopher Morel had the power to hit home runs, but he's a defensive liability. And then Nick Madrigal couldn't hit home runs, could barely get base hits, but he was pretty fair, well, decent on defense. He was serviceable for the most part, but then there were also the times, like I said, like I think about the Cardinal game where the ball slips underneath his glove and Cardinals end up scoring 2 runs off of that, end up winning that game. Again, you have somebody, you sure up third base with Isaac Paredes like that. And again, it's an opportunity for the Cubs to answer some much needed questions there. Um, like I said, Paredes is one of those guys that you could see flourish in Chicago, but you also could see the Cubs look to potentially move him as well. I mean, the Cubs, I think, are taking flyers and taking listens out on all these guys. I don't think they're in love with any of these players. I think Jed Hoyer, if he had the opportunity to move, especially your infield and outfield players, the guys that are in your lineup day in day out. I think honestly, if he could move Ian Happy Wood, if he could move, he's gonna try to move Nico Horner. He's gonna probably try to move Cody Bellinger. Um, at least hear out people on Cody Bellinger. He can't trade Ian Happ because Ian Happ has a no trade clause in his contract. He can't trade Dansby Swanson because nobody's going to take that contract. So you got to look at Michael Bush, who's under team control for many years, Isaac Paredes, who was under team control for many years, and then Nico Horner, and then Cody Bellinger potentially. Those are the guys that you can look at and see as pieces that the Chicago Cubs can potentially move, especially if they potentially could. go after somebody else at third base that might be serviceable. Or if you get a good first baseman and you move Michael Bush over to third base, or if you get Matt Shaw out there as well, you can move Michael Bush over to third base. So the Cubs have many options on what they can do here. And I think Jed Hoyer, again, guys, you're going to hate this. You're going to hate to hear me say this, but you're going to have the wait and see approach. You're going to have to see what's out there. Right now, everybody's at a standstill because we're all waiting to see what Juan Soto is doing. It's a slow news week. Everybody is waiting to see what Juan Soto is going to do. Once Juan Soto signs a deal, I think business picks up big time for everybody. And I think you're going to see the Chicago Cubs make some deals, make some moves, and do some things. But Isaac Paredes could be trade bait. He could be one that you look at and you think to yourself, like, you could obviously see him being a big piece of the Chicago Cubs' future at third base if he can figure out how to hit at Wrigley. He definitely did better hitting at away ballparks than he did at Wrigley once he joined the Chicago Cubs. That's something to note, something to mention, something to keep in mind. But yeah, I just think Isaac Paredes is one of those guys that you can look at and you can see that he could potentially be a big piece for the Chicago Cubs moving forward if he can get back to that all-star form, or he can end up being a bust for the Chicago Cubs, and Jed Hoyer could end up having more egg on his face for him. But I think that another team that may have a more hitter-friendly ballpark for Isaac Paredes might look at him and say, well, he could really take us over the edge. So I do think that Jed Hoyer will end up getting offers for him as well. I think his defense saved him as far as being a Cub this year. Like I said, he hit some doubles. He had some big hits, but he also struggled. He battled at bats. But a lot of flyouts, a lot of the ball being knocked down. A lot of times the wind was blowing in at Wrigley, especially at home, and he just was not able to get those big hits when we needed them from him and hit home runs this last past year in the 2024 season. So with that being in mind, I will have to go ahead and give Isaac Paredes a C plus for his season for the Chicago Cubs. Defensively, he was decent. He was what we needed at defense. At third base, he handled his business at third base. He got the outs. There was only a couple of plays that he messed up where he might have rushed once or twice. I think one of them happened against the Pirates. But other than that, I think he was more than serviceable at third base defensively. So then you have to look at, okay, how did Isaac Paredes do hitting? And his hitting for the Chicago Cubs left a lot to be desired. Again, he did post a .23 ERA with 19 home runs. But guys, he hit 16 of those home runs before he ever even hit Wrigley. So again, like I said, it wasn't what we thought it was going to be once he got here. So maybe he gets comfortable. Maybe he finds his way. Maybe he gets with those hitting coaches this offseason, and maybe he really works on hitting at Wrigley. Or maybe he never even plays another inning for us, and maybe he gets traded this offseason. We don't know. I mean, like I said, to a better park where he's more hitter friendly for him, where he can see his success and his numbers go back up. We'll have to see. I mean, like I said, it's gonna be interesting to see. I am so ready for Juan Soto to make his choice on where he's going to go, because that is going to end up being what's telling about the Chicago Cubs and where they go from there. What happens with Cody Bellinger? What happens with Isaac Paredes? What happens with Nico Horner? What happens with Michael Bush? Once Juan Soto makes his deal known, teams like Philadelphia, teams like Seattle, teams like the Pirates, there's going to be a plethora of teams that are going to come out the woodwork looking to make deals with the Cubs for pieces, especially the New York Yankees. If they lose out on Juan Soto, I would expect them to be heavily favored to make a deal with the Chicago Cubs. But I need to know from you guys, what did you think of Isaac Paredes' time with the Chicago Cubs? What did you think of his half season with the Chicago Cubs? Not even a half season, really a quarter of a season. What did you guys think of his time with the Chicago Cubs? Did you enjoy it? Did you like it? Do you want to see him back? I need you to comment below in the comments. Let us know if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you would like to see him work on, what you would like to see him change. What do you like to see his at plate approach be like? Again, I think that there is room for growth for Issac Paredes, and there is a place for him here in Chicago to flourish, but he's gonna have to figure out how to hit here and how to be successful here if he's going to be that third baseman of the future. Now, with that being said, that is my time for today. Once again, guys, we are the official voice of the Chicago Cubs fans, so we need you to leave a voicemail at 773-389-6954. Email us at chicagobaseballcentral@gmail.com. Follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Chicago Cubs Central. We are constantly posting content. We are constantly trying to give you the very best. When news breaks, we break, and we try to give you the latest and greatest. Once again, thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode. Please like, share, subscribe. I'm your host, Mike Jones from the CCC, Chicago Cubs Central. I appreciate you. Remember, go Cubs, go. Peace.